Welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Besorah, a guide to the last days. I'm Pastor Matt McKeown, and as always, in a minute, I'll be joined by Rabbi Shapira, whom I studied under and who gave me, along with Rabbi Steve Bernstein, an ordination in the Messianic Jewish world. As I've mentioned before, I am a pastor at a Christian church, but I study and practice a form of faith called Messianic Judaism. This is the faith of the first apostles. We must remember that all of those first followers of Jesus were Jews. And even those that were maybe from the Greek-speaking world or the Roman world, they who came alongside the Jewish people to join them were worshiping with them in synagogues. There was no church to be spoken of until hundreds of years later. And so these people had a particular faith, and who they called in those days, and who we in the Messianic Jewish movement call Yeshua, the Hebrew name for Jesus. Now, many of us want to know about a scripture in Jeremiah 31:31, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Shapira about this today because it's written about in his book, The Besorah According to COVID-19. If you don't already have the book, you can order it at goodnewscovid19.net. Once again, that's goodnewscovid19.net, and you will be absolutely amazed at the prophetic nature of this book. Although it's a very large volume, it's very readable, and it's written in layman's terms, and so you will get a lot out of it. There is much good that can come out of this worldwide pandemic, as we have to remember the scripture says that God works everything to the good of those that love Him and are called according to His purpose. So today, as we dive into this scripture in Jeremiah chapter 31, there is a new covenant mentioned. In fact, this is where we get the idea in Christian Bibles of a New Testament. We have a set of covenants that are in what Christians call the Old Testament. And then in Jeremiah 31, it says that there will be a new covenant made. Many Christians believe that this new covenant was fully established at the death and resurrection of the Messiah. However, it does not say in the Bible that this covenant is made with an organization called the church. This new covenant, it says, is with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Rabbi Shapira is going to explain to us today some very interesting things about this new covenant and why we can know for a fact that it has not fully come to pass. This is something that is going to be fulfilled completely at a later time. Another interesting thing about this particular lesson and episode is that we're going to get into a subject that some Christians have a problem with. And that is the subject of Zionism. We mentioned in the last episode and asked if we can separate the God of Israel from the Messiah of Israel from the people of Israel. And in episode 2, we talked about how the letter Yod is such an important letter. It is the first letter in God's holy name that is unspoken by Jewish people. It is the first letter in the name of the Jews, the Yehudim, the Jewish people, and it's the first letter in the Hebrew name of the Messiah. And so all these things are joined together. They are linked forever and ever. And so we talked about how you can't separate Israel's Messiah from the people of Israel. Now, Rabbi Shapira, in this particular episode, is going to talk about Israel with a capital I, so to speak, and Israel with a lowercase I, so to speak. The modern state of Israel, and then the people of Israel. Spiritually speaking, what we would call the house of Israel. Something that you, as a non-Jewish follower of the Messiah, can be grafted into. Now, why is it that we say that that new covenant has not fully come? What are the evidences of that? And does Zionism play a part in the last days? What's also interesting is you're going to see that in the Hebrew there's a certain word that is mentioned in this passage in Jeremiah that might blow you away. because in modern Hebrew, it refers to the followers of Yeshua, the followers of Jesus. This is potentially explosive as we get into this particular episode. But I want you to pay attention, and as I've said many times in the past, I'd like you to keep an open mind and heart. You may be hearing things that, especially if you come from the church world, that you haven't heard before. Or maybe you haven't heard it in this way. What does it mean when from the cross, the Messiah himself said, "It is finished"? Does that mean that these things are done away with? What can we gather from this particular passage, and what is that new covenant? Let's go now to Yeshua Bread of Life congregation in Orlando, Florida, where myself and Rabbi Shapira on location there want to answer this question. Once again, go to goodnewscovid19.net to get your copy of this amazing book. And I'll see you on the other side of this video. Shalom and welcome once again to Decoding the Besorah, a guide to the last days. Once again, I'm Pastor Matt McKeown, and this is Rabbi Shapira joining us. Rabbi, I have a difficult question for you now. So, coming from a church background, we often talk about a new covenant.
Sure.
And in fact, in a way, that's where the Christian Bible gets the term New Testament. You know, it's like a new covenant. So when we read in Jeremiah chapter 31 about this new covenant that's coming, when we look at this from a Christian point of view, it seems like, well, that new covenant already took place. After all, the Messiah died and he rose again, and so now we have the fullness of this new covenant. But in your book, and I'm quoting directly from here, this is talking about the book of Jeremiah, it is virtually...
I know where you're going with that.
Yeah, well, and I'm not trying to do a little gotcha here, because I know you're going to explain it, but this might be difficult for people from the church to understand. It is virtually impossible, this is page 39 of the book, it's virtually impossible to consider these verses to be fulfilled, especially the promise about the least and the greatest who will have a universal knowledge of God. If this is the case, what did Yeshua mean when he declared, "It is finished"? And I know that's a loaded question, Rabbi, because a lot of times people will say in the church, "Oh, it is finished." That even means that's the end of the Torah. It means so many things are done. So why can't we say, he said it is finished, so the new covenant is fully here, right?
Okay, so first of all, I know that people like to jump to those verses. I intentionally put those verses in the book.
Right.
Jeremiah start 31, when there is a promise of Brit Chadasha. Okay? The word Chadash here, we cannot play game. It can mean renewed, but it also can mean something that is completely new. Okay? But we know that it's not something that is completely new. How do we know it? Because we're seeing the same player again. We're seeing here the Jewish people, we're seeing here God. So we cannot assume that it's something completely new.
Right.
Okay, but there is something new about this covenant that is about to give them. And the issue is that you have to go back to the beginning of the chapter. And I need to clarify something that I speak about in the book, that those passages from Jeremiah 31, verse 1, all the way to verse 19, are read in every synagogue in the world. Do you know in what day? In Rosh Hashanah. In Rosh Hashanah, we read from Jeremiah 31, because it's known by the name, as I explain in the book, the day of unification, the day of unity. And the question is here, who is unified? The same event that you're reading about here is the same what you read in Revelation chapter 7, Revelation chapter 15. We're looking at really actually on the same event. Okay,
wow.
You need to understand that. Now, at the beginning of Jeremiah, this particular passage, he's speaking about, he said, I love the family of Israel. Everybody need to understand something. God loves family. He loves families united. And he used the term Israel there. But then in the very next few verses, he's talking about Jacob. And then he changes, he's speaking about Israel. And then he called Israel Ephraim. So first of all, understand something. There is a bigger plan here in play. And he's saying here, behold, the days are coming, and I put a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. When he's talking about Judah, he's talking about Jews. But when he's talking here in the context about Israel, he doesn't talk about the state of Israel. He's actually talking about, if you read the entire context, he's about returning the one who is called Ephraim back to the Israel, which are uppercase I. Not the state of Israel, but something that is bigger than the state of Israel, something that represents spiritually the house of Israel.
A family, a
A
people.
family. So, and he called them Ephraim. Well, first of all, let's understand who is Ephraim. And by the way, he have a name for them. He in Jeremiah 31, verse 7, 8, he called them Notzrim.
Wow.
He called them Notzrim, which Notzrim is the word Nazareth. That's where we get the word Nazareth. This is a prophecy, I believe, about the remnant of Christians who are going to be returning into the new covenant.
Wow.
Now here's the thing, if you read it in context, the new covenant is not given, it's not given to the church, it's given to Israel. Let's not manipulate the text here, okay? It's not given to, unless the Christians now are the house of Judah. You know, that just doesn't make sense.
Right.
He is given it, if you read it in context, he says that a few things have to happen. Let's see what Jeremiah said. Number one, he says, Zionism have to be established. And I spend a full chapter in the book about this. He says Zionism have to be established. Very interesting. 1948, Jews established the Zionist state.
Right.
And Zionism have to be. The word Zionism means in Hebrew a marker. Number two that's going to have to happen, according to the prophet Jeremiah, he says that the nations will be willing to leave Mount Isav on the journey into Jerusalem. Well, what does Mount Isav represent? It's a metaphoric language. They were leaving a system that is called Christianity to start their journey to return. We are calling it the return to the root. They cannot start this return until Israel returns to the land physically.
Wow.
Because now there is a marker for the nations up to Jerusalem. You follow what I'm telling you?
Yes.
And then there is a decision to the nations to occur. And this decision is dependent both on Jacob, represent the Jewish people, and the nations. They have to break out and living, and then it's also said that Jacob have to wait for them in the crossroads to bring them in. So it's depending in both of those things. Those things are yet to be fulfilled fully. We are in the process of them being fulfilled in front of our eyes. So is it wrong to somebody say, I live my life according to the new covenant? No, because every person is in a different place in their journey.
Right.
You know? So for you, for example, or for somebody else who really left the system, the mind system of Isav, of Edom, of Christianity, you live it already. You left it, okay? But it's it's like a drip drop. What the verse seems to suggest, if you read this all in context, and God says to Ephraim, and understand who is Ephraim. I'm not talking about Ephraimites here.
Right.
I am talking about Ephraim. Ephraim's name is Yosef. Anybody who belongs to Mashiach, everybody has belonged to Mashiach, truly belong to Mashiach today, is representing of Ephraim. Okay? Mashiach ben Yosef, the first coming of the Messiah. And it says here, look, I'm giving you a choice, Ephraim. I'm giving you a chance to return. Yeshua has done it. He's opened the door for anybody, no matter what their DNA, ethnicity, call them back. Anybody can come back to the house of Israel today, which is something humongous that Yeshua has done. But he says that only a remnant will come back. So today we have the state of Israel, and people start a spiritual journey. They look up to Jerusalem, not up to Rome. They look up to Jerusalem now. Okay, but when is the new covenant coming? The new covenant coming only after they make a decision. to join themselves. The new covenant is actually given when the ingathering is taking place. It's not the fullness of the new covenant.
Right.
So here we're talking about a corporate, global, new covenant. You know, in Revelation, he say, I will wipe away the tears from their eyes, talking about the Gentiles. He will wipe away the tears because they're going to be recipients of new covenant. And the Jewish people are going to be recipients of the new covenant. But it's impossible to say today that globally or nationally we are under this new covenant.
I think that's what's hard for my brothers and sisters in the church to understand, is because I think when we look at prophecy from a Christian perspective, we have check boxes.
Right.
Okay, this prophecy was fulfilled. This prophecy was fulfilled. What you're saying is this is a prophecy that's partially been fulfilled, but it's in process. It's not in its fullness yet.
That's a good way to think about it. But I even will say this: it can be a covenant can be fulfilled on an individual level. But the prophets here are not talking about this.
This is talking everyone, from the least to the greatest. Everyone. Yeah.
Exactly. This has not been fulfilled.
So me as a person, I can be engrafted into this new covenant, but we are looking forward to the time where it will be
absolutely
everyone.
Absolutely. This is something else, but I think that's what we're going to see in the last days. If I had a little crystal ball and I say what I think will happen in the last days, I think I'm going to see a mass defection from the Christian church to the house of Israel, to the authentic messianic faith.
Basically getting back to the book of Acts.
That's it. Returning truly to the roots.
And we say that all the time in the church, Rabbi. We say we want to get back to those early days of the believers, to the book of Acts and how they had everything in common and all this stuff. But we say it, but do we really mean it?
Right, but you see, here's the thing here. Notice something here. He says, I cut a covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. But then he said, this is the covenant that I will cut with the house of Israel. Wait a second, why didn't he mention the house of Judah?
Right, yeah. That's
right. Do you notice there is a problem here? At first he mentioned Israel and Judah, and then he mentioned Israel. Because when he talks about Israel and Judah here, he's talking about Judah is the Jews and Israel is the Gentiles.
Wow.
Okay, but when he says then Israel is an uppercase I, and he's talking about Jews and Gentiles really.
So they are together collectively,
they are
Israel?
Together. And that's why in rabbinic literature this is called the day of ingathering. And if you want to take it a step further in Thessalonians, he said Mashiach come with the sound of shofar, which lead to believe, just as we read in the Talmud and rabbinic literature and Thessalonians, and suggesting here that Messiah is indeed this ingathering starting in Rosh Hashanah.
So it's not just an ingathering of all the Jews from the four corners of the earth, but even ingathering the nations to Israel.
No, it is ingathering of three distinct groups: physical Jews, those scattered who are Gentiles, and Gentiles, the remnant of them.
Wow.
So I think the idea here today, we need to go out, we need to come out, and we cannot just eliminate what Jacob have to do. If you read it in the context, Jacob have to rejoice, and I don't think we're rejoicing as Jews, seeing Gentiles that coming to the Torah now, that they wanted to partake in it. I think that's a problem we're having today. We need to be excited. We need to take the journey.
But doesn't it excite you, not only as a Jew, but as a rabbi, when Gentiles do come close to the Torah? Don't every once in a while, I notice, like when we've been in Israel, where people will see us with a scroll at the Western Wall doing a teaching, and these Orthodox guys will come up to you and say, look, you're bringing Gentiles close to the Torah. I mean, it makes some people very joyful.
It is. But you know what? Those who are joyful about this, they understand what God is doing.
Right.
Tell you one of the greatest moments I was in Yom Yerushalayim, and we were walking with all the flags, with all those going from all the nations, just waving flags. All the Orthodox are going like that, and you know what they're saying to one another? The remnant of Israel have arrived. I heard it in my own 2 years.
Wow.
They say it. So I think we need to understand. Yes, you can enter into a new covenant with individual, but if you really did individually, it means you enter into a covenant with the house of Judah as well.
Right. Wow.
which represent the Jewish people. That's mean that you're also returning to the covenant. And if I may add just one last point here in conclusion, something Rabbi Cook said that was really important about this new covenant, and I'm actually surprised he didn't ask me that, but I think it's important to mention it. Here's what he's saying. He says, this is found in page 40, if you don't mind, read real quick. It's such a profound statement. Go ahead.
The redemption continues. The redemption from Egypt and the complete redemption of the future are one unending action. The action of the strong hand and outstretched arm, which began in Egypt and works through all eventualities. Moses and Elijah are redeemers in a single redemption. The beginner and the ender, the opener and the closer, together complete the unit. The Spirit of Israel hears the sound of the movements, the redemptive actions, brought about by all eventualities until the sprouting of salvation will be complete in all its plenitude and goodness.
So I want to explain what Rabbi Cook is saying. You take the name, all the covenant, all the redemption. We had Aaron and Moses. We have Esther and Mordecai. We are going to have Elijah and Messiah. You notice they all start with the letter Aleph and they ended with the letter Mem.
Wow.
You notice a pattern here? This is incredible. That the covenants and the redemption, they are like the same book, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So how we should view this new covenant is important. It's something that is based on the Abrahamic covenant. It's something that is based on the Mosaic covenant. And it's something that can continue. It's not a standalone thing. I mean, what do you think Mashiach going to do? He's going to teach Torah. He's going to sit and go and say, hey, let me teach you Torah. So he's going to open Moses. He's not going to come up with some new book. Okay, no, he's going to teach us Torah. Okay, so this is an important notification for everybody. When we talk about Brit Chadasha, we're talking about learning the old, let's call it for a moment, which is really not old,
right,
with a new set of glasses.
Wow.
So what is the upshot for you? People say, I want to enter Brit Chadasha today, right? I want to enter. Okay, great. Mashiach going to come and teach you everything about Brit Chadasha. What is going to teach you? It's going to take 630 mitzvot and teach you the internality of those mitzvot.
Wow.
That's why it says in Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 1, from my mouth I will give you water. I will kiss you with my kisses. The word kiss is the same word to water you, meaning you're going to study straight from the source.
Wow.
You're going to study straight from Mashiach. Purified. It's going to be no thought, not opinion. But today Mashiach is not here. So we are studying with the house of Israel to prepare for those days when Mashiach teaches us. That's where it's becoming a problematic. If you separate yourself from Israel and you study on your own without Israel, you follow what you're not ready to enter to the covenant with the house of Judah.
You know what it reminds me of, Rabbi, is when we're building something,
Yep.
like maybe a piece of furniture, and if you don't follow the instructions, you sort of try to, I can do it my own way. You always have pieces left over, and it's
That's it.
never according to what the designer made. You have to follow the instructions.
So if I can give a practical advice for everybody, come to a yeshivot, study Torah, but study with Jews.
Yes.
Study with Jews, preferably Messianic Jews.
Yeah.
And just get yourself ready. You enter into a new covenant, slowly, but you're preparing yourself for the corporate covenant with the entire house of Israel. And if I can add one last thing, Revelation 7, you see the nations, and that's actually proved my point. Like
Right.
we see here house of Judah and house of Israel, and then it's mentioned only the house of Israel because it's the capital. It's the great gathering. Well, in Revelation 7, they're holding lulav in their hand. They're holding a palm branch in their hand. Now, what you think about it for a second? It's Sukkot. What Israel doing to celebrate Sukkot? What the Gentiles doing to celebrate Sukkot? We're doing the same thing.
And Sukkot is known as the Feast of the Ingathering.
Exactly.
Wow. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, this book is so important. Because we need to understand, in the context of what's going on right now in the world and what has been going on over the last year or so, we have to understand the true meaning and the context of these things. And this book, although it's written in a very readable way, Rabbi, some of us
That's
that
a
come
lot.
from the nations, there's some concepts in here that are very, very deep, and that's why we're doing this special course to help try to explain those things. And I like how you said it sort of straight from the source. It's not just me trying to take you through this book.
No.
I'm with
There's
the
too
author,
much.
and he can explain it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah,
so to speak.
we hope this is really helping you. So, look, the end of the day is this. It's very simple. You are called to be a player in the last days. There's not a person here that is not.
You're not on the bench.
You're not on the bench. There you go. Thank you.
Wow.
That's a good way to put it.
Shalom, everyone, and join us next time. And we're going to continue to ask you some difficult questions, Rabbi, but I think you can handle
Bring
it.
them on. Those are getting...
Shalom. I'm sure some of you had some surprises in that particular video. How about this word notzrim being used? What about this word for Zionism that means a marker? These are prophetic days that we're living in. And this isn't just some sort of platitude that we make. We really do believe this, and we believe that the prophetic timeline began to speed up a bit. The timer began to speed as Israel was made a new nation state in 1948. I love the quote there by Rabbi Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of the new state of Israel. One of his books that Rabbi has in his personal library, he recommended it to me, and now I have it as well, and it is amazing. This was a very wise man. We can learn a lot from Rabbi Kook. But I also want you to remember what it is that we talked about with ingathering. Remember, Rabbi Shapira says, well, he asks the question, what are the people doing? The Jewish people, they are celebrating Sukkot. The Gentiles, what are they doing? They are celebrating Sukkot. And as I mentioned there, Sukkot is the festival of ingathering. It's this idea of gathering together people from all four corners of the globe. Sukkot is the only Jewish holiday that is somewhat evangelistic. You are encouraged even to invite non-religious people into your hut, your booth, your tabernacle, your sukkah, so that you can share in what God has done. We see that in the book of Revelation. We see these great numbers of people with palm branches in their hands. What are they doing? They are celebrating this ingathering feast. And they know how to do it because they have come into a fullness. Remember what I said there about putting together something. I have had many a debacle on putting together even simple things like a bookshelf. I always end up having these pieces left over, and I think, how did I not properly follow these directions? Or, God forbid, maybe we say, well, we don't need the directions. We'll just figure it out for ourselves. Unfortunately, we from the Christian world have been figuring it out for ourselves for the last 2,000 years. And now it is time for us to come into that fullness, to come into that true understanding of what's really going on, to come into this maybe new way of thinking, maybe a new mentality as we are ingathered in the house of Israel. Remember what Rabbi Shapira said. We are this spiritually connected to Joseph. That's what we are. The Messiah, son of Joseph, the first trip to earth that Yeshua had. We are longing for the day when we have Messiah, son of David, the one who comes as a conquering king, the one who destroys the enemy of Israel. And on that day, everything is going to be accomplished. Everything. That new covenant is going to be absolutely complete, where everyone, from the least to the greatest, will know the Lord. We won't need to tell our neighbor, know the Lord, because everyone will know the Lord. The knowledge of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. This is a time that we are all looking forward to, and a time that is fast approaching, and that is why you must truly understand the times, the signs that we are seeing, the prophecies that are being fulfilled. I think one of the best ways that you can do this is to get this book that these episodes are explaining. This Decoding the Besorah is so important. Please forward this to everyone you know. Everyone can benefit from these episodes and lessons. And as I said before, please go to goodnewscovid19.net and order your book today. Once again, I'm Pastor Matt McKeown. I'm so glad that you have been with us. We wish you shalom. God bless you.